The sky burned orange and red as Marcus Webb crawled through the wreckage of the communications tower. His ears rang from the bombardment and dust coated his throat with every breath. Around him, Kepler 442 mining colony lay in ruins. Buildings that had stood for 30 years were now smoking craters. The orbital defense platforms were gone, vaporized in the first minutes of the attack. Webb pressed his back against a collapsed wall and checked his rifle. Half a magazine left. His combat armor had taken shrapnel in 3 places, and his left shoulder throbbed where debris had caught him during the initial strikes. He was alone. The rest of his unit, 12 good Marines, were dead. He had watched the command bunker take a direct hit from orbit. The ground shook as something massive landed in the colony's central square. Webb risked a glance around the rubble. Through the smoke and dust, he saw them for the first time. The Vraks were bigger than any human, standing at least 8 feet tall. Their bodies were covered in natural armor plating that looked like dark gray stone. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. Webb counted at least 50 in the first wave, with more dropships descending from the sky. Their weapons hummed with energy that made the air shimmer. Webb pulled back and keyed his radio. Static. He tried again, cycling through every frequency. Nothing. They had knocked out all communications. The colony was cut off and help was weeks away at minimum. The nearest human fleet was 3 systems over. He stayed hidden as the Vraks swept through the ruins. Their tactics were efficient and brutal. They moved in formation, checking every structure, gathering survivors. Webb heard screaming, then silence. His hand tightened on his rifle, but he stayed still. 1 Marine against an army was not brave. It was suicide. By nightfall, the Vraks had rounded up the survivors in the main square. Webb watched from a burnt-out apartment building on the 3rd floor. He counted heads. 800, maybe 900 colonists. Men, women, children. Mining engineers, technicians, teachers, merchants. People who had come here to build a life on the frontier. The Vraks commander stood before them on a makeshift platform. He was larger than the others, with additional armor plating and markings that Webb guessed meant rank. When he spoke, a translator device rendered his words into flat, emotionless English. I am War Master Kelthix of the Vraks Dominion. This world now belongs to the Dominion. You will work. You will obey. Resistance means death. One of the colonists, a man Webb recognized as the colony administrator, stepped forward. This is human territory. The fleet will come. You can't. The War Master moved faster than something that size should move. One moment the administrator was speaking. The next he was on the ground dead. The Vraks commander had barely seemed to touch him. The human fleet is weak and scattered, Celtic said. You are the 17th species we have conquered. Your military is primitive. Your territory is now ours. He paused, scanning the crowd with eyes that reflected the firelight. Are there any soldiers among you? Silence. The colonists looked at each other, terrified. Webb felt something cold settle in his chest. He could stay hidden. The Vraks might never find him in the ruins. But then what? Watch as they enslaved or killed everyone? Wait alone until he starved or they eventually discovered him? He stood up, rifle still in hand, and walked toward the edge of the building. Every instinct screamed at him to stay hidden, but something deeper made him move. Maybe it was duty. Maybe it was just stubbornness. Here, Webb called out. Every head turned. The Vraks' weapons swiveled toward him instantly. Webb raised his hands, rifle held loosely in one hand, showing he was not attacking. Come down, Celtix ordered. Webb descended the fire escape slowly, hands visible. When he reached the ground, 6 Vraks warriors surrounded him, weapons aimed at his chest. Up close, they were even more intimidating. Each one could break him in half without effort. The War Master walked over, his footsteps heavy enough to feel through the ground. He studied Webb like a scientist examining an insect. A human soldier, Celtic said. His translator made it sound like he was discussing something mildly interesting, but ultimately insignificant. How many of you were stationed here? Just me, Webb lied. No point in telling them his unit was dead. Let them think he was all there ever was. Celtics made a sound that might have been laughter. 1 soldier to defend an entire colony. Humans are even weaker than our intelligence suggested. He circled Webb slowly. What is your rank? Lieutenant Marcus Webb, Human Colonial Marines. A junior officer. The War Master stopped in front of him. Remove his weapon. One of the warriors yanked the rifle from Webb's hands. Another stripped away his combat knife, his sidearm, and the few remaining grenades on his belt. They left him in his damaged armor but took everything that could be used as a weapon. The colonists watched in silence. Webb saw fear in their eyes, but also something else. Hope, maybe. The stupid kind that got people killed. Kelthix tilted his head, studying Webb. I should kill you now. You are a soldier. You represent resistance. Then do it, Webb said quietly. The War Master stared at him for a long moment. Then he made that laughing sound again. No, you humans need to understand your place in the galaxy. You need to see that resistance is futile. He turned to his warriors. Let him live. Let him walk among the ruins. Let him see what happens when a weak species challenges the Dominion. One of the other Vrax officers stepped forward, speaking in their own language. The translator caught fragments. Dangerous and security risk. Kelthix waved a hand dismissively. He is one human, one junior officer of a primitive military. Look at him. No natural weapons, no enhanced biology, average size. He is nothing. Killing him makes him a martyr. Letting him live demonstrates their weakness. The officer still looked uncertain, but he bowed his head in submission to his commander's judgment. Go, Kelthix said to Webb. Live in your ruins. Watch as we take everything from your people. Know that your military cannot save them. Know that you are powerless. He leaned closer, his massive form looming over Webb. If you try to resist, I will kill 10 colonists for every Vrax you harm. Do you understand? Webb met his eyes and said nothing. Take him away, Kelthix ordered. 2 warriors grabbed Webb and dragged him to the edge of the square, then threw him into the street. He hit the ground hard, feeling his bruised shoulder flare with pain. By the time he pushed himself up, the Vrax were already moving the colonists toward the intact buildings on the east side. They would pen them up, set guards, establish control. Webb sat in the dust and watched them work. Around him, the colony burned. Above him, Vrax ships patrolled the sky. Behind him, the ruins stretched out into darkness. The War Master was right about one thing. Webb was powerless right now. One Marine with no weapons against thousands of alien warriors. The odds were impossible. But as Webb stood and limped into the ruins, his mind was already working. The Vrax had made a choice. They had let him live. They had let him keep his armor. They had let him walk free in a colony full of equipment and supplies and knowledge. Webb reached the remnants of the armory as true night fell. The building was half collapsed, still smoking from the bombardment. The Vrax had already been through it, stripping away weapons and ammunition. The racks were empty. The lockers were torn open, but they had missed something. In the back corner under fallen ceiling panels, Webb found it. The combat engineering kit. The Vrax had probably looked at it and seen a toolbox, nothing dangerous. They did not understand that in the right hands any tool could be a weapon. Webb pulled the kit free and opened it. Plasma cutters, welding torches, explosive charges for demolition, electronic bypass tools, and diagnostic equipment. Everything a combat engineer needed to build or destroy infrastructure. Marcus Webb sat in the darkness and began to plan. The Vrax thought they had won. They thought one soldier was no threat. They had dismissed him as powerless and irrelevant. That was their first mistake. 3 weeks had passed since the Vrax occupation began. Marcus Webb had become a ghost in the ruins of Kepler 442. He moved through the destroyed sections of the colony like smoke, never staying in one place for long, always watching, always learning. The Vrax saw him occasionally, a lone figure picking through rubble, a human walking between collapsed buildings. They paid him no attention. Why would they? He was one defeated soldier, stripped of weapons, living in the ruins like a scavenger. To acknowledge him would be an insult to their warrior status. Webb used their contempt like a shield. He spent the first week just observing. The Vrax kept the colonists in the eastern district under heavy guard. They worked them 12 hours a day, extracting ore from the mines and loading it onto transport ships. The aliens had established their headquarters in the old administration building, setting up a perimeter with guard towers and patrol routes. Webb learned their patterns. The Vrax were creatures of habit. Their patrols followed the same routes at the same times. They changed guards every 6 hours, always at the same posts. Their sentries were alert but predictable. They had never needed to be creative because overwhelming force had always been enough. But humans had spent thousands of years fighting other humans. Asymmetric warfare was in their blood. Webb had studied history, read about insurgencies and resistance movements. Learned about people who had fought impossible odds with nothing but determination and ingenuity. The combat engineering kit became his arsenal. The plasma cutters could slice through Vrak's equipment. The welding torches could seal doors or create traps. The explosive charges, meant for demolition work, could be modified. The electronic tools could interface with technology if you knew how, and Webb was learning how. The Vrak's technology was more advanced than human tech, but it was also standardized. The Dominion had conquered 17 species using the same equipment, the same tactics, the same doctrine. They had never needed to adapt because they had never faced real resistance. Their power cells all used the same connections. Their communication relays operated on similar frequencies. Their vehicles had common weak points. Webb found his first opening in the second week. A Vrak's patrol passed through the industrial sector every morning at dawn. 4 warriors carrying standard weapons, following a route that took them past the old generator station. The building was mostly collapsed, filled with broken machinery and exposed power conduits. Webb spent 2 days preparing. He used the plasma cutter to weaken support beams, just enough that they would hold until the right moment. He rigged 3 of the small demolition charges to blow in sequence, creating a cascade effect. He bypassed the emergency system so no alarms would sound. Then he waited. The patrol came through right on schedule. 4 Vrak's warriors, confident and complacent, weapons held loosely. They were halfway through the building when Webb triggered the first charge. The explosion was small but precisely placed. A support beam gave way, dropping part of the ceiling. The Vrak scattered, but the falling debris cut them off from each other. The second charge blew, then the third. Dust filled the air. In the chaos, with visibility gone and their formation broken, the Vraks did what came naturally. They called for backup and tried to regroup. Webb had counted on that. While they were distracted, he moved behind one of the warriors and used a piece of rebar, sharpened to a point, to strike at the joint where neck met shoulder. The Vrak's armor was strong, but joints needed flexibility. The warrior went down with a gurgling cry. By the time the others realized what happened, Webb was gone, vanished back into the ruins. He heard them searching, heard their confusion and anger, but they found nothing except their dead comrade and a trap that looked like a structural collapse. The Vrak's command logged it as an accident. Their equipment occasionally failed. Old human buildings sometimes gave way. One warrior lost was unfortunate but not alarming. Webb struck again 3 days later. A communication relay on the colony's northern edge suddenly failed. When the Vrak sent a repair team, they found the components had been carefully sabotaged. Someone had used a plasma cutter to damage the circuits in a way that looked like a power surge. Then a sentry post's weapons malfunctioned during the night shift. The energy cells had been drained and replaced with depleted ones. The guards did not notice until they tried to use them. Food supplies in a storage depot spoiled mysteriously. The cooling system had been shut down for exactly long enough to ruin everything, then restarted to hide the evidence. Each incident was small. Each could be explained as equipment failure or accident. But together they created an atmosphere of uncertainty. The Vrak started checking their equipment more often, posting extra guards, sending out larger patrols. The colonists noticed too. They saw the Vraks becoming nervous, saw the increased security, heard the rumors. They began to understand that someone was fighting back. Someone was making the invaders bleed. Webb started finding supplies left in specific places, a box of ration bars hidden under rubble near where he slept, a medical kit placed in an abandoned building, a data pad with guard schedules and patrol routes, left where only someone moving through the ruins would find it. The colonists were helping him. They could not fight openly, but they could watch and listen and pass information. They could steal small things from the Vrak stores. They could leave tools and supplies for the ghost in the ruins. A resistance network was forming, and Webb was its center. In the 4th week, Webb made his first major strike. The Vraks had established a supply depot in the warehouse district, protected by a dozen guards and surrounded by motion sensors. Inside were power cells, ammunition, food, and equipment. Destroying it would hurt them. Webb spent 5 days planning. He studied the guard rotations, mapped the sensor coverage, identified the weak points. The depot was well defended, but the Vraks had a blind spot. They watched for threats coming from outside but never thought to check the drainage tunnels below. The mining colony had an extensive underground system for wastewater and runoff. The tunnels were too small for Vrax warriors to navigate, but a human could crawl through them. Webb spent hours in the dark, moving through filth and water, until he found the tunnel that passed directly under the depot. He placed the remaining demolition charges carefully, shaped to direct the blast upward. Then he rigged a timer using components from a broken data pad and a Vrax power cell he had scavenged weeks ago. 6 hours should be enough time to get clear and establish an alibi. Webb was 2 kilometers away when the depot exploded. The blast lit up the night sky, and secondary explosions followed as ammunition and power cells detonated. The Vrax response was immediate. Warriors poured into the warehouse district from every direction and ran straight into Webb's second trap. He had spent days preparing the approaches to the depot, placing small charges in buildings along the likely response routes. As Vrax warriors rushed toward the burning depot, the charges detonated. Not enough to kill, but enough to wound, to slow, to create chaos. In the confusion, with dust and smoke filling the air and warriors scattered, Webb moved through the shadows. He carried a piece of Vrax armor plate he had taken from the first warrior he killed, using it as a shield. He had wrapped cloth around a piece of metal pipe, creating a club that could strike hard enough to dent their armor. 3 more Vrax died that night, not from the explosion, but from a human ghost who struck from the darkness and disappeared before they could respond. Each warrior fell with damage to their armor joints, precise strikes that showed knowledge of their physiology. By dawn, the depot was ashes. 6 Vrax were dead, another dozen wounded, and War Master Kelthix finally understood his mistake. The alien commander stood in the ruins of the depot, staring at the devastation. His officers stood silent around him, waiting. Finally, Kelthix spoke, his words cold with rage. "Find the human soldier. Find him and kill him." One officer hesitated. "War Master, should we request additional forces from the fleet? This situation is—" "No," Kelthix's voice was sharp. "We do not need reinforcements to deal with one human. We are Vrax warriors. We have conquered 17 species. I will not call for help because of one primitive soldier." He turned to face his officers. "Increase patrols. Set traps. Offer rewards. He is one man. We are thousands. We will hunt him down and end this." But as Kelthix gave his orders, Webb was already miles away, hidden in the mining tunnels beneath the colony. He had 2 Vrax power cells now taken from dead warriors. He had learned how their equipment worked. He had proven he could hurt them. The Vrax were hunting him now, but they were hunting a phantom who knew every tunnel, every ruin, every hiding place in the colony. They were hunting someone who had nothing to lose and everything to fight for. Marcus Webb sat in the darkness and planned his next strike. The war had truly begun. 6 weeks had passed since the occupation began, and Kepler 442 had become a nightmare for the Vrax Dominion. What should have been a simple conquest had turned into a grinding war of attrition against an enemy they could not find and could not stop. Marcus Webb had evolved from a survivor into something more dangerous. He was no longer just one Marine without weapons. He was a predator who had learned to hunt creatures far stronger than himself. The mining colony's infrastructure had become his weapon. The tunnels beneath the surface stretched for kilometers, a maze the Vrax were too large to navigate. Webb moved through them like blood through veins, appearing where needed, striking without warning, vanishing before the enemy could respond. The maintenance crawl spaces in the remaining buildings were his highways. The ruins the Vrax considered strategically worthless were his fortresses. Every piece of the colony that the invaders dismissed as unimportant became part of Webb's arsenal. He had learned their language by now, or at least enough to understand their communications. The Vrax were not careful with their radio chatter. They had never needed to be. Webb listened to their frequencies, learning their movements before they made them, understanding their plans before they executed them. Patrols that entered the southern sector stopped coming back. The first one simply vanished. 12 warriors went in at dawn. By noon, when they failed to report, a search team was sent. They found the bodies in a collapsed subway tunnel. Each Vrax had been killed efficiently, struck at the weak points in their armor. Their weapons were gone. The second patrol knew to be careful. They moved in tight formation, watching every shadow, checking every corner. It did not matter. A section of tunnel floor, weakened by precisely placed plasma cutter marks, gave way beneath them. They fell 3 stories into an old water treatment facility. The ones who survived the fall died when Webb sealed the exits and released mining chemicals into the chamber. The third patrol never entered the southern sector at all. They were too afraid. Webb now had Vrax weapons. The biometric locks that should have prevented anyone but Vrax warriors from using them had been a challenge, but not an impossible one. Human engineers had been hacking security systems for centuries. Webb used the electronic bypass tools from the combat engineering kit, combined with components from broken Vrax equipment, to create a workaround. The weapons recognized the signal they expected and fired. Having their own weapons turned against them terrified the Vrax more than anything else. It meant the primitive human had not just survived, but had learned, had adapted, had become dangerous. War Master Kelthix doubled the patrols. He set ambushes in places where Webb had struck before. He used the colonists as hostages, threatening to execute 10 for every Vrax killed. But the threats rang hollow because the colonists had started to resist too. Seeing one human fight impossible odds had given them courage. Small acts of defiance spread through the work camps. Tools went missing. Equipment broke down. Work slowed. When the Vrax punished them, they resisted harder. The occupation that should have required 100 warriors now needed 1,000 just to maintain order. Webb struck at the heart of their command structure next. The headquarters building was the most heavily defended location in the colony, surrounded by guards, sensors, and automated weapons. Getting in was supposed to be impossible. Webb did not try to get in. Instead, he spent a week studying the building's power system. The Vrax had connected their equipment to the colony's main generator, which drew power from a geothermal plant 2 kilometers away. The power lines ran underground through maintenance tunnels. On a moonless night, Webb crawled through those tunnels to the junction box that fed the headquarters. He did not cut the power. That would have triggered alarms. Instead, he modified it. Using components from Vrax equipment and his own engineering knowledge, he turned the power feed into a weapon. When the modified system activated, it sent a massive power surge through every Vrax device in the headquarters. Computers exploded, weapons overloaded. Communication equipment melted. The backup generators kicked in automatically, sending another surge through systems that were already damaged. The headquarters went dark. In the chaos that followed, with warriors scrambling to restore order and officers shouting contradictory commands, Webb struck the outer perimeter. 4 guards died before anyone realized they were under attack. 2 more fell as they rushed to respond. Webb used their own weapons, fired from the darkness, then disappeared into tunnels they could not follow. By the time power was restored, Kelthix had lost 6 more warriors and his entire command and control infrastructure. It would take days to repair, and even then, they would never trust it completely. The War Master stood in his damaged headquarters, surrounded by smoking equipment and frightened officers. For the first time since the invasion began, Kelthix felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, not yet, but uncertainty. This was not how conquests worked. The conquered were supposed to submit or die. They were not supposed to fight like this. "We need to change tactics," one officer said carefully. "This human knows our patterns."
"We must become unpredictable. We are Vrax warriors," Kelthix snarled.
"We do not change tactics to accommodate prey." But even as he said it, he knew the officer was right. Standard doctrine was not working. "Then what do we do?" another officer asked. "He is one human, but he is killing us systematically. The troops are afraid. They call him the Ghost. They say he cannot be killed." Kelthix slammed his fist into a broken console, denting the metal. "Double the guard on the colonists. If we cannot find him, we will draw him out. Execute 10 humans every day until he surrenders himself." The order went out at dawn. The Vrax gathered the colonists in the main square and selected 10 at random. They were lined up against a wall while the others watched. Webb was supposed to see this, supposed to feel guilt, supposed to surrender to save them. But before the execution could begin, the Eastern Guard Tower exploded, then the Western one, then the Southern one. Webb had planted charges days ago, waiting for the right moment. The Vrax scattered in confusion, rushing to defend their perimeter. In the chaos, the colonists nearest the guards grabbed whatever they could find and fought back. It was not much desperate people with tools and rocks against armored warriors, but it was something. The Vrax had to put down the revolt, which meant they could not execute the hostages, which meant Kelthix's strategy had failed. 3 more Vrax died in the fighting. The colonists paid a heavy price, but they proved something important. They were not helpless. They would fight. Celthix realized too late that by trying to draw Webb out, he had pushed the entire colony into open resistance. He had lost control. That night, the War Master made the decision he should have made weeks ago. He sent an encrypted message to the Vrax fleet. Request for reinforcements. Request for orbital bombardment authorization. He would destroy the entire colony from space, kill every human, and purge this humiliation from the records. The response came back within hours. A battle fleet would arrive in 2 days. Upon arrival, they would sterilize the planet's surface and eliminate all resistance. The embarrassment of Kepler 442 would end. Celthix allowed himself to feel satisfaction for the first time in weeks. 2 days. The human ghost could not stop a fleet, could not fight orbital bombardment, could not prevent the inevitable. But that night, something strange happened. Every Vrax communication system suddenly activated at once, broadcasting on all frequencies. It took them several minutes to shut it down, and when they did, Celthix demanded to know what had happened. Someone hacked our communications, the technical officer reported, his voice shaking. They used our own systems to broadcast a signal. It went out on all frequencies, including the ones used for long-range communication. What did the signal contain? Celthix asked, though he already knew the answer. Everything, War Master. Video footage of the occupation, tactical data about our forces, recordings of our communications, battle reports showing our casualties. The officer hesitated, and a message. From the human. Show me. They played it back. Marcus Webb's face appeared on the screen, dirty and exhausted but defiant. He spoke in clear, simple English, knowing the translator systems would render it into every galactic language. My name is Lieutenant Marcus Webb of the Human Colonial Marines. For 6 weeks I have fought the Vrax Dominion on Kepler 442. They invaded with 3,000 warriors. I am one soldier. They thought I was not a threat. They were wrong. He paused. I am transmitting everything I have learned about the Vrax, their tactics, their weapons, their weaknesses, their arrogance. To every species listening, this is how you fight them. This is how you win. The transmission ended. The technical officer looked at Celthix with fear in his eyes. War Master, that signal reached across multiple systems. Every species in communication range received it. Celthix felt cold rage settle over him. Webb had not just fought the occupation. He had humiliated the Dominion in front of the entire galaxy. Every conquered species, every potential target, every rival power now knew that one human had brought a Vrax occupation to its knees. Find him, Celthix said quietly. Find him now. Throw every warrior we have at finding him. I want him dead before the fleet arrives. 8 weeks into the occupation, and Marcus Webb had 48 hours to live. The Vrax Armada was coming, and when it arrived, Kepler 442 would burn from orbit. There would be no escape, no defense, no miracle. Just fire from the sky and the end of everything. The colonists knew. Word had spread through the work camps, whispered in the mines, passed between prisoners. Some wanted to surrender, to beg for mercy, to hope that submission might save them. But Webb knew better. The Vrax did not forgive prey that fought back. They made examples. The transmission had changed everything. For 6 weeks, Webb had fought a guerrilla war, staying hidden, striking from shadows. Now he had broadcast his war across the galaxy. He had shown the universe how one human had brought a Vrax occupation to its knees. The Dominion could not let that stand. They would erase Kepler 442 and everyone on it to protect their reputation. Webb sat in the ruins of the old observatory, high enough to see the colony spread out below. Smoke rose from a dozen fires. The Vrax had stopped trying to maintain order. They had pulled back to defensive positions, waiting for the fleet. The colonists were locked in the camps, guarded but otherwise ignored. Everyone was waiting for the end, but Webb was not done yet. The transmission had not just been propaganda. It had been bait, and now he needed to make sure the trap worked. The broadcasting equipment he had used was cobbled together from Vrax communication systems, human computers, and sheer desperation. It should not have worked at all, but Webb had learned that Vrax technology was powerful but inflexible. They built their systems to work perfectly within specific parameters. They never imagined someone would use their equipment in ways it was not designed for. The transmission array was still active, still sending. Webb had set it to repeat his message every hour. broadcasting to every frequency he could access. The Vrax knew where it was in the ruins of the old mining complex on the northern edge of the colony. They could destroy it easily, but Webb had made sure they could not ignore it. Every hour the transmission told the galaxy that the Vrax were losing to one human. Every hour it damaged their reputation further. Kelthix would have to stop it, which meant sending warriors into the mining complex, which was exactly what Webb wanted. He had spent 2 days preparing the mining complex, turning it into a killing ground. The place was a maze of tunnels, shafts, processing facilities, and storage chambers spread across 3 square kilometers. The Vrax had never bothered to secure it because it had no strategic value. That was their mistake. Webb had rigged the entire complex with every trap, explosive, and weapon he could create. Demolition charges from the engineering kit were placed in support columns. Vrax power cells, modified to overload, were hidden in junction boxes. Sections of floor had been weakened to collapse under weight. Cables were strung at neck height in darkened tunnels. Mining chemicals, toxic to Vrax biology, were stored in containers rigged to break. The complex was a death trap, and the transmission was the bait that would draw them in. Webb checked his weapons. He had 2 Vrax energy rifles, both modified to work with human hands, a sidearm taken from a dead officer, a bandolier of their grenades, his combat knife still sharp, and the plasma cutter from the engineering kit, which could slice through their armor at close range. He was wounded, exhausted, running on stimulants and stubbornness. His armor was held together with tape and wire. He had not eaten a full meal in days. But none of that mattered anymore. This was not about survival. This was about making them pay. The attack came at dusk. Kelthix himself led it, bringing 200 warriors, not just a patrol or a strike team, but a full military assault. They surrounded the mining complex, cutting off all exits. Then they moved in, spreading through the tunnels in overwhelming force. Webb watched from his position deep in the complex. He had cameras set up, scavenged Vrax surveillance equipment showing him their movements. They were being methodical, clearing each section before advancing. Smart tactics. It would not save them. The first trap triggered when a squad of Vrax entered Processing Hall 3. The floor beneath them gave way, dropping them into an old smelting pit. The ones who survived the fall found themselves in a dead end with no way to climb out. Webb sealed the exits and moved on. The second trap was cruder. A section of tunnel rigged to collapse when the support beams were destroyed. 15 Vrax were buried under tons of rock and metal. Their armor kept them alive, trapped and screaming in the darkness while their air slowly ran out. Kelthix realized what was happening and tried to pull his warriors back, but Webb had planned for that too. The entrances they had used were now blocked by collapsed tunnels. New paths opened, leading deeper into the complex, away from escape. The Vrax had to choose between retreating through unstable ground or advancing into unknown danger. They advanced. Warriors did not retreat. Webb started picking them off in the deeper tunnels. A rifle shot from the darkness, dropping a warrior. Then silence. The Vrax would search, find nothing, and move on. 2 tunnels later, another shot. Another body. The ghost was hunting them. Kelthix split his forces, trying to surround Webb's position. It was the right tactical choice and exactly what Webb had prepared for. The Vrax squads found themselves separated in the maze, unable to support each other. Webb moved between them, using his knowledge of the complex to appear where they did not expect. A grenade rolled into a room full of warriors. They scattered, but the blast was not meant to kill them. It ruptured containers of mining chemicals, filling the air with toxic vapor. The Vrax armor protected them from immediate death, but their breathing systems were not designed for it. They choked and stumbled, easy targets for rifle fire from above. Another squad tried to use their heavy weapons to blast through walls, creating their own path. The walls came down, but so did the ceiling. The mining complex was old, damaged by the orbital bombardment. Structural integrity was already compromised. Bringing down one wall started a cascade that collapsed an entire section. The battle raged through the night. Webb moved like smoke through tunnels he had mapped and memorized. The Vrax followed, trying to corner him, trying to overwhelm him with numbers. But in the close confines of the complex, numbers were a liability. They got in each other's way, created targets, made themselves vulnerable. Webb was down to his last rifle when he reached the central chamber. This was where he had placed the transmission array, still broadcasting its message to the galaxy. The chamber was large enough for the Vraks to deploy their forces, which meant this was where the final confrontation would happen. Celtics entered with 50 warriors, the survivors of his assault force. They had lost more than 100 warriors to reach this point. The War Master looked around the chamber, seeing the transmission equipment, the human who had become his nightmare standing ready to fight. "You cannot win," Celtic said. His translator made the words sound tired. "The fleet arrives at dawn. You have bought nothing except your own death." "I have bought time," Webb replied. He was bleeding from multiple wounds, swaying on his feet. "And I have bought knowledge. Everyone knows what happened here. Everyone knows that humans do not quit. It does not matter. Your fleet is too far away. This colony will burn and you will die with it." Webb smiled, blood on his teeth. "You sure about that?" The look on Celtic's face was worth everything. The War Master suddenly understood that Webb had one more trick, one more surprise. He started to give orders, but it was too late. The explosives Webb had placed throughout the complex detonated in sequence. Not random chaos, but a carefully planned demolition. Support columns failed. Critical junctions collapsed. The entire 3-square-kilometer complex began to fold in on itself. Celtics and his warriors ran for the exits, but Webb had sealed them. There were emergency tunnels, maintenance shafts, ways out that the Vraks did not know about, ways that only someone who had spent weeks studying the complex would know, ways that Webb had blocked or rigged with more traps. The War Master made it out. His size and strength let him smash through obstacles that would have stopped others. But most of his warriors did not. They died in the collapsing tunnels, crushed by falling rock, trapped in dead ends, lost in the maze as it came down around them. Webb stumbled out through a maintenance tunnel as the sun rose. Behind him, the mining complex was a smoking crater. 200 Virax warriors had gone in. Maybe 20 had come out. The transmission had stopped. The equipment was buried under rubble. But it did not matter anymore. The signal had been repeating for 2 days. Every species in communication range had heard it dozens of times. Webb collapsed against a rock, his rifle empty, his body failing. He had won the battle but lost the war. The fleet would arrive within hours. Orbital bombardment would follow. He had done everything possible and it was not enough. Then the sky lit up. But not with enemy fire. With friendly IFF signals. Human warships dropped out of FTL, dozens of them. Destroyers, frigates, cruisers. The fleet had come, following Webb's transmission, arriving just in time. Marcus Webb watched the cavalry arrive and let himself believe, for the first time in 8 weeks, that they might actually survive this. 3 months after the liberation of Kepler 442, Lieutenant Marcus Webb sat in a hospital ship orbiting the colony and tried to remember what normal felt like. The doctors said he would recover fully. His body was healing, the wounds closing, the broken bones mending. But some things did not heal so easily. He had spent 8 weeks fighting impossible odds, living in ruins, killing to survive. 8 weeks of moving through darkness, setting traps, watching enemies die by his hand. 8 weeks of being more ghost than human. You did not come back from that unchanged. The battle had been brief once the human fleet arrived. The Vraks occupation force, already broken by Webb's guerrilla war, had tried to fight. It was over in hours. Celtics had died in the fighting. Shot down by a human gunship as he tried to reach an escape craft. The few Vraks survivors had been taken prisoner. The Vraks armada had arrived 6 hours later, expecting to find their warriors in control and ready for orbital bombardment. Instead, they found a human fleet and a defeated occupation force. The battle that followed was not even close. Webb's intelligence, broadcast across the galaxy, had told the human commanders exactly how the Vraks fought. Their tactics, their formation preferences, their technological weaknesses. The Vraks lost 3 capital ships before they retreated. The Dominion's reputation for invincibility had been shattered, not by a grand military campaign, but by one Marine who refused to quit. The story spread fast. Every species the Vraks had conquered heard about Kepler 442, heard about the ghost who had fought 3,000 warriors and won. Some species started to resist. Others reached out to humanity, seeking alliance against the Dominion. The balance of power in the sector was shifting. Webb did not care about the politics. He sat in his hospital bed and tried to remember why he had fought so hard to live. The door opened. Admiral Chen entered, flanked by two intelligence officers. They had been debriefing him for weeks now, wanting to know every detail of his campaign. How he had survived, how he had learned to fight the Varax, how he had turned a colony into a battlefield. "Lieutenant Webb," Chen said, sitting down, uninvited. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got buried under a building, sir." It was mostly true. The final collapse of the mining complex had left him with 3 broken ribs, a fractured arm, and more bruises than he could count. "The doctors say you will be cleared for duty in 2 weeks. Webb nodded. He had expected this conversation. Chen leaned forward. "We want to understand what you did out there. Not just tactically, but mentally. You were alone, outnumbered, outgunned. Most soldiers would have given up or died trying. You turned it into a 8-week campaign that destroyed a Vrax occupation force." How Webb thought about it. He had been asked this question in a dozen different ways by a dozen different officers. They wanted a formula, a strategy, something they could teach and replicate. But there was no formula. "They made mistakes," Webb said finally, "and I took advantage. And what mistakes?" They assumed they had already won. They saw one soldier without weapons and decided I was not worth killing. They let me walk free in a colony full of equipment and supplies. They followed predictable patterns because their doctrine had always worked before. They treated the occupation like it was already over. He met Chen's eyes. "Their first mistake was not killing me immediately. Their last mistake was thinking I would stop fighting." One of the intelligence officers spoke up. "But you must have known you could not win. 1 Marine against 3,000 aliens. What did you think would happen?" "I thought I would die," Webb said simply. "But I decided they would remember me, that I would hurt them enough that they would regret letting me fight." "Did you ever consider surrendering?" Webb was quiet for a moment. "Every day, every single day I thought about it. Walking into their headquarters, putting my hands up, ending it. But then I thought about the colonists, about humanity, about what it would mean if I quit." He shook his head. "I could not quit. Not because I was brave or special. Because if I quit, it meant they were right about us. That humans were weak, that we did not matter." Admiral Chen studied him. "You became a legend, Webb. Every human in the fleet knows your name. Every species in this sector knows what you did. You proved that one person, if they refuse to give up, can change everything." "I did not do it alone, sir. The colonists helped. They provided intelligence, supplies, support. They resisted too, we know. We have been talking to them. They say you inspired them, that seeing you fight made them believe they could fight too." Webb looked down at his hands. They were scarred now, marked by burns and cuts and hard use. "Soldiers' hands. Is that why you are here, sir?" "To figure out how to make more soldiers like me." Chen smiled slightly, partly. "But also to offer you a choice. You have done enough, Webb. More than enough. You can retire with full honors. Medal of Honor, pension, anything you want. No one would blame you for walking away. Or you can return to active duty. We are forming special units trained in asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, the kind of fighting you did on Kepler 4042. We need instructors. People who have actually done it. People who can teach others how to fight when the odds are impossible." Webb thought about it. He could walk away. Find some peaceful colony, try to forget 8 weeks of horror. Pretend he was normal again, but he was not normal anymore. He had changed into something else in those ruins. Something that knew how to survive impossible situations. How to fight when fighting should be suicide. How to refuse defeat even when defeat seemed certain. And the Varax were still out there. The Dominion had lost 1 battle, but they ruled 17 systems. They had armies, fleets, resources beyond measure. The war was far from over. "When do I start?" Webb asked. Chen nodded as if he had expected this answer. 2 weeks. Once you are medically cleared, you will be promoted to captain and given command of a training unit. We are calling it the Ghost Program. He stood. "The Vrax made 1 mistake, Webb. They let you fight. Now we are going to teach that mistake to everyone. Every species that wants to stand against the Dominion will learn what one human did with nothing but determination and a toolbox." The officers left. Webb sat alone in the hospital room, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Vrax Dominion was regrouping, planning their next moves, trying to rebuild their reputation. Let them try. They had taught humanity an important lesson at Kepler 442. They had shown humans exactly what happens when you underestimate them, when you dismiss them as weak and irrelevant, when you make the mistake of letting them fight. Webb's comm unit chimed. A message from the colony below. The colonists had rebuilt the central square and erected a monument, a simple stone marker with names engraved. The Marines who died in the initial attack, the colonists who fell during the occupation, and at the top a dedication to those who resist, to those who refuse, to those who fight impossible odds and win. Remember Kepler 442? Webb closed the message and stood testing his injured leg. It hurt, but it held. Everything hurt these days. He would carry these wounds for the rest of his life, physical and otherwise, but he would carry them forward. Into the next fight. Into the next impossible situation. Because that was what humans did. They adapted. They endured. They fought on when fighting should be hopeless. 2 weeks later, Webb reported for duty at the training facility. The first class of recruits was waiting, eager young soldiers who had heard the stories, who wanted to learn how to be ghosts, how to fight like Webb had fought. He looked at them and saw himself 2 years ago. Before Kepler 442, before 8 weeks of hell, before he learned what he was capable of when pushed to the absolute limit. Listen carefully, Webb began. What I'm going to teach you is not about being heroic. It is not about glory. It is about surviving when survival should be impossible, about fighting when you have already lost, about refusing to quit even when quitting is the logical choice. The recruits leaned forward, listening. The enemy will underestimate you. They will dismiss you as weak, as primitive, as not worth their attention. They will make the mistake of thinking humans are easy prey. Webb smiled, and it was not a kind smile. We are going to teach you how to make them regret that mistake, how to turn their assumptions into weapons, how to fight dirty, smart, and mean. He paused, meeting their eyes one by one. The Vraks learned a lesson at Kepler 442, one they will never forget. They learned that if you give a human even the slightest chance to fight back, they will, and they will not stop until they win or die trying. Webb's voice hardened. We are going to make sure every species in this galaxy learns that same lesson. You do not let humans fight, because once you do, once you make that mistake, it is already too late. The training began. Weeks turned into months. The first class graduated and deployed. Then the second, then the third. Ghost units spread throughout the human fleet. Specialists in asymmetric warfare, soldiers who knew how to fight impossible odds. And across the galaxy, the Vraks Dominion began to understand what they had unleashed. They had started a war with humanity expecting an easy victory. Instead, they had woken something dangerous, a species that refused to accept defeat, that adapted to every challenge, that fought harder the more desperate things became. Marcus Webb trained them all. The ghost who had destroyed a Vrak's occupation through sheer stubbornness,